Welcome to freedomlovin.com, where we focus on building freedom in an unfree world. Through personal development, location independence, and passive income strategies. Now here's your host, Kevin Koskela.
Welcome to Freedom Lovin'. This is Kevin, and this is episode number 47. And today, in just a couple minutes, I have an interview coming up with a couple guys that wrote a book called Get Paid for Your Pad, Jasper Rivers and Husefa Kapadia. And it's a really cool idea. It's how to rent out your place on Airbnb, make money, and be able to travel while that income is coming in from a place that you either own or rent. So stay tuned for that. There's a lot of really cool and interesting tips in the podcast, in the interview. So let's see, just quick update on what I've been up to. So I've been doing the SEO writing, and that's been going really well. It's taking up some time. I spend about 2.5 hours, typically, maybe 2 hours to 2.5 hours per article. So I'm looking at about 7 hours a week that I'm spending on this. So it's definitely a time commitment, but I'm really enjoying it and working with my friend and, kind of helping his business out, not just in writing, but also I come up with ideas that I think will be good for him. So it's kind of like a partnership, which is really what I was looking for. So that's really good. I guess the only challenge will be at the end of the time that I kind of allotted for this, which would be, let's see, I'm looking at, it would be sometime in the middle of July, if I look at when I started, that I'd be looking to kind of move into another business. Then what do I do with this? That's kind of still a question. I think we'll probably talk about scaling it back a little bit. So I'll still write articles, but maybe not as frequently. And then I can, free up some time to do something else. And I'll probably stick with the writing theme, I'm guessing. I haven't really determined it yet, but I'm thinking that I do sales copy for my sites, so I can offer that as a service for some people, and that would be right in line with what I'm already doing with SEO writing. So that's kind of to be determined, probably figure that out in July. But the other thing that I'm coming to you from San Diego. I flew back here. I was supposed to have an event that I was helping to put on for internet marketing, and the event got canceled. We were a little bit short on people, and the guy that I was working with wanted to put it off just in case we were trying to get 100 people, and we probably could have got 80 to 100, but it would have been a lot of stress, and so I was perfectly happy to cancel it, even though I already had my plane ticket. But I've got other things going on in San Diego that are just as important as that, so definitely using the time here and keeping really busy and setting up meetings and things like that. So it's been a good trip. It's great to get back to the coast and the nice cool breeze. That is definitely welcome. And I've been talking to people that, friends, and then just kind of people that I've been meeting here, and they ask me, are you wanting to settle down in Austin? And the other question I get is like, where do you live? And so I'm kind of having a hard time actually answering that right now. I usually say, well, I'm kind of between places, or I'm a permanent traveler, or I'm living in Austin for now, but it's kind of a tricky question. But as far as settling down, I haven't been able to answer that one at all, because I don't know where I want to be for a long period of time. I think the way I'm structured now, where I kind of have San Diego as sort of a home base, that's been working for a while, but I'm perfectly happy to be a permanent traveler and kind of not really have a home base. And what's weird to me is that it doesn't feel weird to be a permanent traveler and to not have a home and not kind of feel like, okay, I need to go back to this place and have these people around me and that kind of thing. I definitely have a lot of friends in San Diego and now in Austin, but it's still like, for me, I just feel like I can be a permanent traveler and have, sort of virtual friends and then meet people along the way. And that's sort of right now anyway, that's sort of the way I want to structure my life. And it doesn't feel right to say, like, I can't say I'm leaning towards being anywhere for a long period of time, but that could change tomorrow. I mean, I don't know. Something may happen in my life, and I really want to spend a lot of time in one place. But right now, that's not the feeling I'm getting. So it's kind of a strange thing, just because not that many people do this. Not that many people will kind of bounce around and don't have a home. But yeah, the permanent traveler lifestyle doesn't have to be the bouncing around. I've talked about this before. You can be a permanent traveler and stay in one place for 10 years, but just have the ability or the option to go off and be in other places, and to not necessarily call the place that you're at for 10 years, that may not be your permanent residence. Maybe that's just the place you spend a lot of your time. So, but you're a permanent traveler or a perpetual tourist, so you're actually a tourist in that town. So that's kind of the way I like to look at it. I had another idea a friend I was hanging out with last night gave me, and that's about communication, because she said that I'm passionate about communication and relationships, and which is kind of true, because I can talk all day and all night about that stuff. So she was giving me an idea to kind of do something along those lines, and it's kind of it is exciting, and it is interesting to me. I don't know what that would be. Definitely when it comes to relationships, I don't believe in the kind of the traditional path that most people kind of take. Anyway, I've been thinking about this today a little bit in terms of what I could do. I'd like to have a podcast where I talk about, or where maybe there's a panel discussion where we talk about traditional relationships versus kind of alternative relationships. I had back a few months ago, I had JJ Roberts on, and he was his site is Sex 3.0. And I really think that he has a lot to say, and there's a lot of really interesting concepts there that came out of that. And I don't know if that's the whole, I don't think that's the end-all, be-all answer to relationships, but definitely the more people that I talk to about this stuff, there really seems to be a change going on. I mean, it's just the way people look at relationships it's changing so much. In the past, even 5 years, I can see that what's worked in the past, or what people thought worked in the past, is not really practical. It doesn't really work these days. And so I want to get into this probably in a later podcast a little bit more. But if you have any ideas for me in this realm, I'd love to hear about it. If you are kind of thinking the same way, like you're doing a kind of non-traditional relationship and it's working or it's not working or whatever, I would love to hear from you. So if you could just go on to freedomlovin.com and post a comment on this podcast or in any of the shows that I've done, that would be awesome. And let's see, one more thing. I was going through Facebook this morning, and I came across a cool blog post by my friend Dan Andrews, who was on the show previously. And it was on the top 10 best places for digital nomads. And I love these posts because they're always so controversial, and everybody's got an opinion. All the people that travel will tell you all different sorts of things. But, coming from Dan and the Tropical MBA people, this is pretty good because he's got like a lot of information about all these cities. So I'm not going to go through the whole entire post, but, he based it on good value, kind of some of the Dynamite Circle trends like meetup attendance, and travel-friendly places, available short-term housing, visa situations, and then cafe cultures, co-working, those type of things. So I'll just read off the cities, and you can check it out. I'll post the link to this article in the show notes for this show. So the top 10 for 2014 are: number 1 is Berlin, number 2 is Prague, number 3 is Chiang Mai, 4 Ho Chi Minh City, 5 New York City, 6 Austin, Texas. Was really stoked to see that on the list. Number 7 is Bangkok. Number 8 is Medellin, which is one place that I am considering for the winter. And number 9 is Barcelona. And number 10 is Ubud, Bali, who the last guest I had on the show, Gregory Deal, was 2 podcasts ago. That's where he was living. And so I'm excited about that place too, because when I was there last, the Wi-Fi was horrible, but it is getting better, so it is pretty much paradise there. And with good Wi-Fi, that could be a spot to keep an eye on. So so anyway, again, I'll put this in the show notes if you want to read more about these locations and check out what's going on. Then just go to freedomlovin.com to find that. And one last quick thing. Tim Ferriss has a new podcast. If you don't know who Tim Ferriss is, he's the guy that wrote the 4-Hour Work Week. So if you haven't read the book, which you probably have, but if you haven't for some crazy reason, just go out there and read it, or get the summary and read the summary and just kind of get the idea of what it's about. And his podcast is really cool. I've listened to about 3 episodes so far, and there's a lot of different topics on there. The last one, he had on the atheist philosopher Sam Harris on the show, and they talked a lot about psychedelic drugs, and some different ways to meditate. And so it was really cool. I just think that this is a podcast if you're really into thinking. It's a great show, and I think it's just getting better. I think that Tim is taking a lot of the stuff that he's done, and he's actually expanding on it. Instead of just focusing in on all the stuff that he's already talked about, he's kind of going beyond that. So I think that's a really cool thing. So recommend that, and that's about it for today. without further ado, here's my interview with Jasper and Hussefa from Get Paid for Your Pad. Stay tuned for that. Have a great week and go out there and build some freedom. All right. Well, I'm super excited to have Jasper Rivers and Hussefa Kapadia on the line today. And they have just written a book called Get Paid for Your Pad. And that can be found at getpaidforyourpad.com. And it's all about how to maximize your Airbnb listings and how to get the most out of, marketing your apartment or your place to stay with Airbnb, which is something that I've done in the past. So it's a topic that's right at my alley. And again, it's getpaidforyourpad.com. Hey guys, welcome to Freedom Lovin'.
Thanks for having us on the show, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so excited because I have been doing this for years, actually, just kind of renting out my pad, either the apartment that I'm staying in or wherever I'm staying. When I travel, I'll put it on Airbnb, and I usually have a guest that will stay. And it's worked out so well because I've never had any problems. I've never had any issues whatsoever. And actually, most of the time, people leave it cleaner than how I left it for them. So it just seems like a win-win, and everybody seems happy. And I get all these good glowing reviews, and yeah, I just feel like it's a really amazing thing. So when Jasper, when you reached out to me, I was like, yeah, that's exactly the type of thing that I want to have on this podcast because it's a way to make money, it's a way to help people. It's just awesome. So
yeah, absolutely. The great thing is, we have talked to hundreds of people, and they literally all say the exact same thing. What it does is you can rent out your place, and you can travel, and you can actually get paid while you're on vacation. And moreover, people are ultra respectful. It's a huge concern of people initially, but that melts away very quickly, and you realize that people treat your home with great respect.
That's absolutely right. It's good that you mentioned that, Kevin, because if you ask potential host, his main concern is he's always wondering whether the guests are going to treat his apartment well. So, and I have the same experience like you do. My apartment is always clean after the guests leave. I've never had anything damaged. I've never had anything stolen. It's just been like an amazing experience.
Yeah, that's so cool. Now, let's step back a little bit, and I wanted to get a little bit about your backgrounds. Like, how did you guys get started in business, and where did you come from?
Okay, well, let me just give you a quick background on myself. I used to be in finance for a number of years, and at some point I realized living a life in a cubicle wasn't really what I was dreaming about when I was young, and it wasn't really giving me the fulfillment that I was looking for.
And that was what part of the world?
That was actually in Chicago.
Oh, Chicago, okay.
Yes. So I actually decided to quit my job and start traveling. And this is about 4 years ago. And at first, I started several businesses because I needed to support myself. And about 2 years ago, I listed my apartment on Airbnb. Now, quickly, I was already making so much money for my listing that I didn't really need any financial support aside from my listing. So I really started to just focus on my Airbnb business, optimizing it, and just trying to be the best host I could be. And consequently, my earnings kept going higher and higher. So right now, I'm basically just focusing on my Airbnb business, and the experience was so amazing that I decided I need to tell people about this. Mm-hmm. I had so many friends who were also traveling, and they never heard of Airbnb, or they were doing an Airbnb listing, but they just weren't doing it right. So that's really how I came up with the idea to write the book.
Nice. How about you, Jasper?
Oh, sorry, that was actually Jasper.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I gotta get your voices down.
All right. So, hi guys, this is Hussefa Kapadia, and I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So, first of all, Jasper and I have known each other since around 2008. We met in Chicago. At the time, I was in law school. So, before law school, I was a software engineer. Then I went to law school and I worked in patent law for about 4 years before decidedly leaving the profession to be an entrepreneur. So me and Jasper have taken somewhat similar paths in that we wanted freedom, flexibility, and we wanted to do the things that we loved. Jasper is a huge traveler. He has a travel blog as well called The Traveling Dutchman. And that's one of the things that he loves. Now I work primarily in education. I have a education services company where I do private tutoring and SAT, ACT prep. And I also write. I have a blog as well. And when Jasper initially approached me about the idea for the book, I loved it because I've always been a huge fan of Airbnb. And I just thought the concept was terrific. So he brought me on essentially because he knows that I love to write. And I was happy to join the project.
Yeah, that's really cool. Now, you guys are both kind of location independent types, or?
Absolutely. Yes, I've been location independent for about 4 years now, and Huzafa for about a year.
Yeah.
Nice. And you find that the Airbnb, renting out your apartments and things like that is a great tool for anyone that's location independent, right?
Absolutely, because it has so much advantages over just traditional long-term renting. Well, because first of all, the income that you can generate is so much more. Like I'm making 2.5 to 3 times the amount of money that compared to the long-term rental I used to do. And in addition, whenever you're at home, you can block the calendar and you can stay at your own house, which is not possible when you're renting out long-term.
Yeah. So now, how do you use it? Are you mostly just when you travel, you rent it out, or do you actually specifically leave, or do you have a couple of different places that you live in, or how does that work?
Well, I basically travel about 10 out of 12 months of the year. And whenever I'm planning to go home, I just block the calendar. I make those days unavailable. Now, I'm pretty flexible when it comes to that. If somebody has a booking like way in advance, then I'll just stay at my parents' place for a few days.
Mm-hmm. It's nice to have that option.
Unfortunately, I do still have that option, yes.
So now you sent me some points about your book, and I wanted to definitely go over those because I've had some challenges in terms of like how to do a lot of the things to make the most amount of money. I got lucky my first time around doing this. I was living basically about 20 steps from the beach in San Diego, and there are almost no hotels anywhere near the beach in San Diego. There's like 2, but one's really small. And so you just have this huge demand and very limited supply of places to stay around the beach. So I had this old, this is an apartment building that was built, or a house, that was built in, probably 80 years ago. It was really old, and the air basically came right through the place. So it wasn't like the place itself was not very nice, but the location was amazing, and I would never have any problems filling it. And I had no idea how to price it. So I thought, well, $95 a night sounds about right. But I had so many emails, and after the whole thing was over, I was like, oh, I could have charged way more than that because of the demand, and I didn't quite realize that. But let's talk about the first point. So how to effectively communicate with guests. What do you guys think about that?
Right. So this is one of the most important things when you're hosting on Airbnb. And the reason is, if you ask any traveler, what's your main concern if you would stay in an Airbnb place, it would be that the traveler is not 100% sure that somebody will be welcoming him, that the house even exists. When you go to a hotel, you just know there's a reception. There's always going to be someone there. There's always going to be people who are going to take care of you, whatever happens, right?
Right.
Now, with Airbnb, that's not the case. You're relying on the responsibility of your host, and which is someone who you've never met. And that's the main concern of a traveler. So if you communicate well with the guest prior to arrival, you can take away this worry. Now, let me just mention 3 things how you can do this. First of all, it's important to communicate often. This way, you let the guest know that you're on top of things and that you're taking care of them. The second thing is you should always respond as soon as possible when a guest communicates with you, whether it's when the booking request is made or when you get an email with some questions. Always respond as soon as possible. The third thing you can do is you can ask the guest questions like, hey, when do you arrive? What time? Are you flying in or do you take the train? How do you plan to get to the apartment? Because the more information you have as a host, the better you can accommodate your guest. And if you do this correctly, then you make your guest feel comfortable traveling to your location, and your guest will also be much less likely to complain about minor things as you've shown him that you care about your guest. And for most travelers, that's the most important thing.
And Kevin, I just want to mention one other thing. So in the book, what we've done is we've included essentially all of the basic templates of emails that Jasper uses with his guests. So for example, he has one that he sends out as soon as the booking is made. He has one that he sends out a few days prior to check-in. Then he has one that he sends out during the stay. So these are all tools that can be used if you actually get paid for your pad. These are tools that people can use to make their own templates and their own emails when communicating with guests.
Yeah, that's great. It's definitely important to have those templates. And what I would do is just go back and copy and paste what I've written to everybody else. And usually it's a great point, Jasper, that you make about the communication, because I had a lady so I left town for 2 weeks. I was going to Peru. And I had 2 different guests staying there. So it's kind of like that was the first time I had done something like that, where I actually had multiple parties staying. And I had one lady coming the second time around, and everything went really smoothly, except for I didn't realize that the street that I lived on was going to be closed off for a festival the weekend she was there. So she got there and had no idea how to get in. And luckily, I have this texting plan on my phone that I can text all over the world for free. And so she texted me, and I got back to her like 10 minutes later, and she was so thrilled that I was on top of everything. And it was like, I got such a great review from her because there was this issue, and then I just told her what to do, and it wasn't super convenient for her, but just the fact that I was able to get on top of it right away, she was so happy. So it's like that does make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Guests are pretty forgiving, like especially when it's something that's out of your control.
Yeah.
As long as you show that you care and you put in the effort to solve the situation, the guest will be very grateful for that.
Totally. Now, okay, the second one is devising a pricing strategy.
Right. So this is actually one of the more complicated subjects of our book, right?
Yeah.
Because and I think a lot of hosts have a lot of trouble sort of defining the pricing strategy. So there's quite a lot of things that we can go over, but essentially it comes down to adjusting your price according to demand. And demand varies. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to just come up with a price, something that you feel like is reasonable, and then just charge that every single day, right? The first thing you can look at is weekdays versus weekends. Let's say your place is located in a business district. Well, that means that weekdays are probably going to be more popular than weekend days. Mm-hmm. So you should price it accordingly. And alternatively, if you're in a tourist zone, then it's more likely that the weekends will be more in higher demand. So you can charge more for that. Now, how do you find this? You can look at other places in your neighborhood, other Airbnb listings, and see how they do it. Do they charge more during the week or during the weekend? You can look at the percentage of hotels that are booked. And on booking.com, you can do this. You can select some dates, and then it'll tell you the percentage of rooms that are occupied. And you can also look at the hotel prices. If the hotels around in your neighborhood are more expensive in the weekend, then it's very likely that the weekends are in higher demand. Now, the second thing is you can look at the seasons. Most places will have like a low season, a high season, or maybe even a medium season. The third thing is always check out like special events happening in your town, right? And I mean, there's some standard ones that basically are everywhere, like Christmas, New Year's. There could also be other events in your town that will raise demand. Now, I'm talking about a conference or maybe a big music festival or whatsoever. So make sure you Google that and adjust your price according to the expected demand. The fourth thing is you want to start with your highest price when you're far away from the check-in date, and you want to lower it as you're getting closer to the check-in date, if that makes sense.
Yep.
The reason is you don't have very high marginal costs. And what I mean by that is it doesn't cost you very much extra to have a guest in your house versus not having a guest in your house. Mm-hmm. The only extra costs are like, maybe electricity or gas usage or or such, but most of the cost will be, either your rent or your mortgage, right? So as you're getting closer to the check-in date, you basically want to lower the price to fill up your space. And especially when you're starting out, this is really important because you want to get a lot of bookings in the beginning.
Yeah.
So I really recommend for people who are starting out, start with a higher price and then really aggressively lower it in the last few weeks to make sure you fill up your bookings.
And see what's going to happen, right? So Airbnb, obviously the review system is essentially the most critical part to getting a steady flow of demand. So even if you've lowered your price to that right around that point of the marginal cost where your profit is really minimal, what's going to happen is it's still going to be highly beneficial because you're going to get bookings and you're going to get people who are going to write phenomenal reviews, and that's going to enable you to eventually raise your prices to the point where it's meeting demand appropriately.
Yeah. And we go into detail in the book, and we've actually developed a system that people can just implement. It will be a little bit too complex to explain it here.
Sure.
But just to give you a little bit of background of how I came up with this. So I actually have a master's in econometrics, which is really about optimizing all sorts of different problems. So, I'm a bit of when I see a problem, I always want to find an optimal solution. That's sort of my default mode. So,
okay.
So that's where this came from.
Yeah, that's cool. So, with the mistakes that I made, I think I mentioned that before, that I kind of underpriced myself in the one place because I just didn't know, I didn't really quite understand it. But then the last place I lived in was also a good location, but it was downtown San Diego, not at the beach. And I thought it was going to be kind of a cakewalk, and I would just be able to charge at least $150, $160 a night. But the problem was I was there in the winter, and the demand is much less in the winter because there's just not as many conferences, not as many travelers. And so I was just sitting there waiting, and nobody was coming along for the longest time. And then I did a little bit of research on Airbnb, and I found there was another unit in my building that was going for like half the price that I had listed.
Right.
So then I had to completely lower it. And but then what happened was I lowered it to compete with them, and I started getting emails. I started getting people like in January, February asking, and then after it kind of got into spring, all of a sudden I started to become flooded with emails, and so I had to start raising the price back up. So it's just like it's a constant kind of game where you have to lower it and raise it depending on where you are and what the season is and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like when you start out, you just want to lower the prices until you get like maybe something like 80-90% occupancy.
Yeah.
Once you get that and you have a solid reputation, you have a bunch of good reviews, then what you do is you basically start raising the prices across the board until you see demand dropping. And that's when you kind of hit the sweet spot.
Yeah, totally. Now, so the next thing is moving up in the Airbnb search rankings. Is that based on mostly on reviews or?
Well, there's a lot of factors involved in the Airbnb search algorithm. You can kind of compare it to Google. Google probably uses like thousands of factors. But first of all, let me mention the importance of this. I'm sure you know that when you go in Google and you search for something, the results that you see in the first page will get the vast majority of the clicks, right? Mm-hmm. Most people aren't even going to look on the second or even the third page, right?
Yeah.
This is true for Airbnb as well, because in essence, the Airbnb search algorithm is kind of like a mini Google, right? So it's really important to get to the first page of your search results, whether that's in your neighborhood or even in your city. Mm-hmm. Now, the second thing, the search results it's your main marketing channel, right? It's the main way how you can show, users what an awesome place you have. The first thing I'll mention is, so the search algorithm looks at the last 90 days. So all the factors that are involved, it's only the last 90 days. So if you, for example, get like a really bad review or you've been not responding very quickly, you'll be forgiven after 90 days, which is good to know. But let me get into some of the different factors here. So most of them are customer related, because in the end, Airbnb wants to show the user the best place to stay for the guest, right? So the most important thing is how many bookings that you have, how many reviews, the rating that people give you, right? And then there's a bunch of like activity related factors, like how quickly do you respond? What's your response percentage? Like, do you respond to everyone, or do you sometimes not respond at all? Then there's how active are you with your calendar? Do you update it daily, or do you update it once a month? And they might even be using factors as like how many times you log in, and basically it makes sense. Airbnb wants a host who's actively involved, managing his listing, making sure it's up to date. And the last thing is has to do with trust. Airbnb is very much based on trust, right? Mm-hmm. Like we discussed a little bit earlier, it's the difference between a hotel and Airbnb is like you're dealing with one person versus with a professional organization.
Right.
So trust is very important. And there's a number of things you can do. There's a bunch of verifications. I'm sure you've seen those. Mm-hmm. Like you can connect your account to Facebook. You can verify your email, your telephone number, etc. So you should always make sure you get as many verifications as possible as a host. And the last thing is references. Like even if you haven't had any guests in your place, you can ask your friends to write you a reference.
Yeah.
And those people, it's not necessarily someone who stayed at your house. It could just be your friend who will just write you a reference, say like, hey, Kevin is an awesome dude, like super friendly, responsible guy. Even that will help.
Yeah. So that's like for someone that's just starting out that doesn't have any reviews, that's probably a good way to kind of build up your reputation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And a lot of these there's no downside. You know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, there's no downside in updating your calendar every day, right? So it's kind of like these are no-brainers. So everyone should do this.
Yeah, cool. So, okay, the next one is composing a good listing. So you talk about the how to get the best photos and things like that.
Yes, exactly. So first of all, the listing is that, I mean, this is your place to essentially advertise your space. And it's really critical. Now, probably the most important thing above anything else are the pictures. The first thing that anybody's going to look at when the search results populate it's called your primary photo. You want that primary photo to be really stunning, really clean, and you want it to draw whoever is looking. You want to draw them in. Now, for those who are listening who are new to Airbnb, there's this incredible feature that they've recently started offering, and that's a photography service. And the best part is it's completely free. So Airbnb will send over professional photographers to shoot your entire place. And in about 2 weeks, they upload everything to your account, and then you just put in the description, and you're all set. So we highly recommend doing that. If in the event that this service isn't available in your area, we have a detailed section in our book that sort of gives the basics of how you want to take good pictures and what tenets to follow. All right. And then there's another thing that's really important is your description. So after somebody's clicked on the pictures and maybe scrolled through them and said, this is a kind of a cool place, they're going to read through your description. They're going to look at all the amenities, and you want to make sure your description is really vivid and very accurate. So every time a guest is coming, they know exactly what they're getting. And you want to be as descriptive as possible. Now, I'm not just talking about laying everything out, but also try and give it a bit of an emotional appeal, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. You want to essentially put somebody in the situation of being at your house. So it's almost as if you're writing a book and you want to paint a picture with your words. So these are all things to keep in mind. Again, a good listing, even if your apartment or house is amazing, if your listing isn't gripping, and you're gonna have issues.
Yeah, that's really awesome that Airbnb comes out and takes photos all for free, because I could have used that. The last place that I stayed in, it was a kind of newish apartment, and it looked okay, but the problem that I had with it is that the lighting wasn't great in there. The light didn't come in and fill the rooms. So when I took photos, it was like it just didn't look very good. And then all the photos I found online, same thing. So I could have totally used that. But what I did, instead of having the main photo be of the apartment, because there's nothing much to see in the apartment or outside the apartment, I was in the Little Italy neighborhood of San Diego, and I just took one of the pictures that was online of the sign, the Little Italy sign, which looks really cool at night. and I put that as my main photo. And as soon as I did that, I noticed my emails started to pick up, and I got a lot more listings, or a lot more tenants. So
that's awesome. And there's two really good things that you mentioned there. First thing is, of course, you want to experiment a little bit. That's what this whole process is about. It's about finding that right price via experimentation, finding that right picture, and eventually you can tweak everything, but it just takes time and a little bit of patience. Another thing is that I just wanted to mention about the picture service, which is so phenomenal, is, I mean, this is why Airbnb is an incredible company. They want to work with everybody to make the guest experience and the host experience really optimal. Not only do they offer this incredible service, but by the way, they just launched a pilot program for cleaning. So now they actually send over Airbnb certified cleaners that will come and clean your place and leave everything so that your guests will definitely leave you better and better reviews. It's amazing. And by the way, and that's all paid for right directly through the money that comes in for your listing. So they're doing their best to make everything as convenient and seamless as possible.
Wait, so they actually have their own cleaning service?
Now, this has been launched recently. Right now, it's only available in New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, and in select areas only in those cities. But yeah, it's a pilot program, and assuming that it works out, they're planning to expand it to other cities.
Well, that is so cool, and it's so smart of them to do it, as it just goes hand in hand, because of like the situation I was in where I was out of the country and I had two different people coming in to stay at my place. I have a maid service that I use, and so I put the key, I have a lockbox and all that, but if I didn't have all that, it would have been kind of hard to coordinate everything from, a couple thousand miles away.
Right.
But did you say that was paid, or do you have to pay extra for that? You
have to pay extra, but the money will come directly out of the money that you receive for your booking. Okay. So it's really convenient.
Yeah.
And the way to think about it is, if you really want to be a superb host, and we talk about this and Get Paid for Your Pad as well, if you really want to be a great host, you're going to want to hire a professional cleaner, because that's what people expect.
Yeah.
When they are traveling and you're going somewhere, even if it's a house, people are used to staying in hotels. What are hotels known for? Usually, hopefully, they're known for everything to be pristine when you walk in. You don't expect to see a speck of anything out of place. So if you don't provide that same experience, they're immediately going to be judging it against that reference. So you're going to hire somebody anyways. Why not have somebody that's certified and that's part of the Airbnb system?
Absolutely. And I the first time around that I did this, I was doing my own cleaning, and I lived in this place with tile floors, and they were so hard, and I was on the beach, so it was just impossible to keep it spotless. I mean, I could get it to a reasonable level, but I had one negative review on the cleanliness part of it, and I was so mad because I'm like, I did everything I could, but I'm not a professional cleaner. I didn't spend hours on it, and somebody marked me down. But it's definitely worth it to pay the $50 or whatever to get a maid or to use their service.
Absolutely. We talk about this at length actually in the book as well. And the thing is, this is exactly what we say. Even if you're a really clean person, you got to go that extra mile, because again, that's where the expectations are.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next one is creating a good title. I think we kind of covered this a little bit, but do you have any other tips on titles?
Yeah, so there's several ways to create a good title. So there's not really like one way that's perfect or something. It kind of depends a little bit on your property. But here's a few things to think of when you're creating your title. First of all, you could include your property's best asset. Like, let's say you have an amazing balcony with an awesome view, and it gets like sun all day. Then it probably makes sense to mention that. So your title could be something like "Studio with Best Balcony in the City" or something like that, right? The second thing that you could do is you could make it informational, right? The more information that the user will get from your title, the better. Make sure you don't state anything that's already shown in the search snippet. Like if I search for Los Angeles, I already know that I'm going to Los Angeles, so I don't need to get that information from the title, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, like if you just say like great studio in Los Angeles, that doesn't really give me much information. All I get from that is that it's a studio. I already knew I was going to Los Angeles.
And the thing is, Kevin, we see so many people make that mistake. Everybody includes the city, or not everybody, but the vast majority of listings that we see include the city name, and it's simply redundant. So it's a really good point to make, to know that that's going to show up right when the listing populates.
Yeah, and you don't have very much space. You have like 50, 35 characters, so you really gotta make use of those characters and use it in the best way possible. And another thing you can do, and let me just talk about my own listing for a second here. Like my house is really specifically suited to a group that consists of two couples because I have two separate bedrooms that are located on opposite sides of the apartment, and there are several walls, like even outside walls in between. So, it really creates a perfect situation for two couples because it gives them a lot of privacy. So I mentioned this in my title. I say perfect couples home. And the other good thing is I also like to host couples because they're less likely to cause disturbance. They're less likely to like throw like parties and and get drunk and stuff. So that works out really well too.
So the next one, we actually covered this pretty good, preparing your house for guests. And so number 7 is dealing with unhappy guests. I haven't had this before, but what do you guys recommend there?
Okay, certainly. So this, of course, is never a pleasant thing. Now, even in my business, I've had to deal with this time and time, here and there. And at the end of the day, when you're striving for excellence and you're trying to be the best host you can be, it can be difficult. It can be painful, right? You talked about the guest who dinged you slightly for the place not being clean. You're like, come on, I cleaned this so well. It can be a little bit unsettling. The first thing we want people to know is when you're dealing with any sort of negative view, you want to take a step back and approach it without emotion. So look at it objectively and take the feedback seriously. Even if you think it's unreasonable, see, well, wait a minute, okay, he's actually made this comment. Is there something I can do to improve this? Right? The guest is, you have to take that really sort of business-oriented view that the customer is always right. So take it seriously and do what you can. Okay. Now, another thing that you should think about doing, and sometimes this can be difficult, right? You've collected that money and you don't want to give it back, but think about reimbursing them, even partially, if that works for you, because what you want to do is you want to sustain your reputation at all costs. So you can give them a couple $100 back and they won't write a negative review. That's going to be much more valuable for you in the long term. Okay, so now let's say you actually get a bad review. Let's say they write something up and it's out there for everybody to see. All right, so what you should always do, and you have approximately 30 days to do this, what you should always do is write a response. You can write a response to that review and it's going to post on your profile. And you definitely don't want to say anything that's attacking the guest. Well, I don't know what you're talking about. My place is super clean. This is crazy. Yeah. That immediately is going to come off as defensive. Instead, acknowledge what they've said and tell them you've done everything you can to rectify it. And within that response, even invite them to come back and stay. Say, I'd love to have you again at a discounted rate to show you everything is good if you ever come back and visit my city. So you want to be extremely courteous and friendly and show that you care. And at the end of the day, if you handle this correctly, the beautiful part about it is this can potentially even boost the number of bookings you get. Because if somebody goes around and they see, like, let's say you have one negative review, but they see you've responded to it in depth and you've been very courteous and you've solved the problem, that speaks a lot, speaks volumes.
Totally.
Yeah, and let me just add one thing here as well. In the end, it's the responsibility of the host to make the guest stay as satisfying and comfortable as possible. And even if you feel like your guest is being unreasonable, it's still your responsibility. The guest is probably on holiday, and most people only have like 1 or 2 holidays a year, so it's an important thing for your guest. Mm-hmm. So you really have to take this responsibility seriously as a host, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's awesome stuff. Now, so the last one we have here is how to get great reviews. Okay,
well, basically, this all comes down to being the best host you can be and showing that you care. I mentioned this earlier. Even if there's a few minor issues, and, these can be out of your control, right? For example, I have a fish shop, right, pretty close to my house. And although it's nice that you can get some fresh fish, it doesn't always smell very nice, right? Mm-hmm. So, some of my guests have mentioned this, like, they'll say like, hey, everything was great. The only thing we didn't like was the smell. But obviously I can't do anything about that. But if I show my guests that I do everything within my control to make their stay as comfortable as possible, they are not going to complain about this. And I have actually never had a guest mention this in one of the reviews. The only way they've mentioned it to me is in private feedback, right? So that's by far the most important thing. Just being the best host you can be, taking your job, taking it serious.
The great thing about that, so for example, we're actually staying in an Airbnb rental place right now in Las Vegas. And when you see somebody go the extra mile, it makes you feel good. This place, for example, that we're at right now, they have all the little extras. They've placed Kleenex bottles and shampoo and soap for all of us. All the cleaning supplies are in order. Everything was done perfectly. And it's just like you come into the place and you're like, okay, this person's gone the extra mile. And it makes you feel good. And that's really important. It's kind of an intimate experience. And that's what you want to strive for. You want to make your guests feel like they've really been taken care of.
Right, that's a really good point. And then the other thing you can do is once your guest leaves, and as soon as you have the opportunity to leave your guest a review, you should immediately do it, because you're basically setting a precedence for your guests. Like, not all guests will be familiar with the Airbnb review system, especially not if it's their first time using it, right?
Right.
So basically what you do, you leave them an extensive review, and that will increase the likelihood that your guests will leave one for you as well. Now, if you don't see your review within like a week or so, feel free to send your guests like a friendly reminder. Just send them a quick message saying like, hey, I really appreciated that you were a guest in my apartment, and again, I hope you had a great time. I've actually written you a nice review that's going to help you get accepted in other properties, and I would really be grateful if you could return me the favor, right?
Yeah.
And Airbnb has actually just changed the time frame that you have to leave a review. So maybe after 2 weeks, like a few days before the deadline, you send out another reminder if the guest hasn't left you a review.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Now, I had one other thing that I've dealt with, and I'm sure people are wondering that are listening to this. So I rent apartments. I don't own any of the places that I live in, that I stay in for very long. So how do you deal with landlords and using Airbnb, renting out your places when they're not yours?
So the first thing we want to mention is this is a very delicate area. You want to be careful. I mean, you really want to be careful that you're not doing something that's in violation of your lease, right? So we recommend that if you do plan to do something like this, just go run it by your landlord, because otherwise you're opening it. We have talked to people who have faced eviction because of this. They've tried to do it behind the landlord's back and they found out, and it can be problematic. So the best way to do it is open, complete disclosure and see what they say, bounce it off them. But once you sort of get the approval of your landlord or the building owner, then it's no problem at all. But if you are open about it, it solves all the issues right up front.
Yeah. Totally agree. Now, what I've done is to kind of, I'm probably a little bit more of a rule breaker than a lot of people, but I look for, when I'm renting, because I move a lot, I'm location independent, so I kind of go places for a few months and then, maybe move on after that. And so I look for apartments when I'm renting that are not part of an apartment complex, because you're pretty much never, ever going to be able to do this. If you go to an apartment complex, which is owned by some big corporation, and you say, hey, I'd like to rent out my apartment or Airbnb when I leave for a few days, they're going to just say, absolutely not, no way, no chance you can do that. But when you rent from an individual, just like one person, it's a lot easier to communicate. And I had a situation in my last place that the property manager of my place lived about an hour and a half away, and the owner lived about an hour and a half away, and the guy never returned messages. So I had a pretty easy situation where I wasn't about to go ask him about this Airbnb stuff, but he had no idea it was happening. And if anything bad happened to the place, I'm obviously going to pay for it. I'm not going to, make somebody else pay for it. So
Right.
That worked out really well. But it was, again, like you said, it wasn't quite doing the upfront and honest and making sure everybody knows about it thing.
So, and then you just reminded me of another really good point as well. If there's any, let's say there's any hesitance or reluctance to let you do this, another thing we recommend is make a deal. Say, listen, I want to rent this out on the short stay market. It's really reliable. And if you're willing, I'd love to give you X percent, 5%, 10%. And that's a win-win for them, especially once they recognize that they're really not taking on any additional risk. Airbnb has provided a super safe environment to have this steady stream of people come in. And one final thing I want to mention, if you are thinking about, let's say, purchasing property, let's say you want to buy a house or a condominium and you're thinking about down the line renting out your place on Airbnb, if you do end up purchasing a condo, it's really important to look at the rules of the condominium, right? So some places short stay rentals are fine, others it's specifically banned. So if that's something that you're thinking about and you're in the process of buying, make sure to look into that.
That's a great point, because I have a friend that was doing this with her condo, renting it out, making really good amount of money, and it was going so smoothly. And then she always would tell her guests, like, don't call the maintenance if you have any issues, just call me because I'm pretty close. So one guest, I guess, didn't listen to her and just called the maintenance, and something happened. I forget what it was, but then that got back to the apartment management. Then they found out that it was not someone, that it wasn't her, and then they ended up fining her $5,000.
Oh my God!
And saying that basically she'd lose the place if she did it again. So it was like, yeah, that was a disaster.
Yeah.
But yeah, that can be avoided for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. You just with a little bit of preparation and planning, all of that can be avoided. But yeah, so that's a really unfortunate situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So now I wanted to kind of get into the idea of doing it as a business versus kind of a side income. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I have actually, at some point, I got to a stage where I was making so much money of it that it became almost like a full-time income, right? So what I did is I just kind of focused on just running it as a business and being way more professional about it, paying that little extra money to get a really good cleaner, right? Making sure the check-in management is perfect. I actually hired a virtual assistant to deal with a lot of the communication and the management of the listing, right? Mm-hmm. So the way I see it, it's really, instead of just being a temporary host and meeting some people and just renting it out when you're away as kind of like a little extra side gig, just really taking a professional stance towards it.
And one thing that we actually haven't mentioned yet, but this is extremely, extremely important. What we have found is you can make somewhere between 2 to 3 times what you make in a fixed term lease. So let's say you rent out to one tenant for the entire year, you could double, potentially triple your income. So if you actually want to turn it into a business, it's going to make a substantial amount of money, and that's the beautiful part about the entire system.
Plus, you have the flexibility. Whenever you're back home, you can stay in your own house, and you'll never have to worry about your guests leaving your property. For example, in Holland, which is where I'm from, my apartment is in Amsterdam. If you rent out your place on long term, it's actually very, very hard to get the person out of your house, even if you have a contract. Mm-hmm. You'll have to go to court. Usually decides in favor of the tenant. So that's an added advantage as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love the whole idea of doing this as a business, and I've actually thought about doing something where I have 2 apartments in a city, and I just go back and forth, rent out one on Airbnb and stay in the other one, and then switch back when it makes sense.
Yep, that's another good thing you can do. And like I said, sometimes I even stay with friends sometimes, or family or whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a great way to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, cool. This is awesome stuff, and just wanted to give out your website again, and that is getpaidforyourpad.com, and you can get the book there. And do you have a price point yet on the book, or are you waiting on that?
Well, you know what? Actually, we are launching our book in about 2 weeks from now. So what people can do right now is they can sign up and leave their email address, and we'll follow up with them and give them all the updates about when the book's going to get launched. And also, we added actually a few bonuses to the book as well. We actually added the guidebook that I send out to all my guests, which has all the information about the apartment, neighborhood, etc. And, guests can use that as a template to sort of create their own. In addition, we have a closed Facebook group where people can ask questions and share experiences. And we'll also be doing some live sessions where people can ask questions, and we'll answer whatever questions they might have.
All right, and Kevin, just to clarify, so our book, the official launch date is June 23rd, so that's a week from next Monday. So June 23rd is when it comes out. Yeah. And also, I think you asked about the price point, so we're pricing the book at $47.
Okay, cool. And that includes everything that Jasper just mentioned.
Exactly, includes those additional 3 bonuses, absolutely.
Right on. Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's really all you need to get started is, just something like this, and it gives you all the basics, and then it sounds like you guys are doing beyond that, which is cool, is we're creating kind of a community, which I think is really needed out there.
And our goal with this book is really to create the best resource on Airbnb that's out there. We've actually read every single book that's ever been written on Airbnb, as well as countless of articles on different websites. And our goal is really to give the Airbnb host an all-encompassing guide that contains every single piece of running your Airbnb listing.
Nice. Awesome. Well, guys, it's been really fun having you on, and I really enjoyed the conversation. And thanks again, and good luck with the launch and everything you're doing.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Kevin, for having us.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Freedom Lovin' Podcast. To break free today, head on over to freedomlovin.com and download our free guide. 7 practical tips to living free in an unfree world.